I overheard my son-in-law bragging to his buddy over the phone, his voice full of that smug swagger only he could pull off. "You'll see, man. We're getting the big house and all that land Richard left behind. The old man's just getting some useless toolbox." My ears burned, but I said nothing. What Brandon didn't know was that the antique surveyor's transit case he mocked wasn't empty at all, and when I finally opened it, I found that my brother Richard had left me the real fortune. Before we continue, please subscribe to Sweet Grandpa Stories and tell me where you're watching from in the comment. While everyone was busy celebrating Brandon's new millions, I was already awake before dawn. My body doesn't move like it used to. My knees creak and my back complains with every step. 67 years of working land and drawing maps will do that to a man. But this wasn't an ordinary morning. Today was the reading of my brother Richard Hanlon's will, the man who built an empire of land deeds, rail depots, and mining rights across Arizona. I knew what to expect. The stares, the whispers, and probably the laughter. Still, I had to be there. I put on the only white shirt I had left, cuffs yellowed with age, and the same field hat I'd worn under 100 desert suns. My daughter Emily came to pick me up in her husband's black Cadillac Escalade. She didn't even step out of the car, just cracked the back door open. But Brandon was there too, sitting in the passenger seat, tapping furiously on his tablet. He didn't turn around to greet me. "Hurry up, Walt, we're on a schedule," Brandon barked, not looking up from his screen. "I've got a developer from Phoenix waiting for a call at 2. We need to wrap this reading up fast." I climbed in, my knees popping painfully. As I settled onto the leather seat, I saw the map on Brandon's screen. It was Richard's beloved subplot in the valley, the one with the ancient oak trees. "Bulldozers can be there by Monday," Brandon muttered to himself, grinning. "Strip the trees, level the grade. That land is worth more as a strip mall than a nature preserve." My stomach churned. Richard loved those trees. He'd spent 40 years protecting them. Now, before the body was even cold, Brandon was planning to pave over his legacy. Emily gripped the steering wheel tight, her knuckles white. "Brandon, please, not today." "Business waits for no one, babe, not even the dead," he sneered, finally glancing back at me in the rearview mirror. His eyes were cold, assessing me like I was a piece of equipment that had depreciated to zero. "Comfortable back there, Walt? Try not to get dirt on the upholstery." I said nothing. I just wiped my clean hands on my pants and looked away. I turned toward the window to clear my mind. Through the glass, Flagstaff was waking up. A few neighbors waved to each other, others gathered in small knots, gossiping. I caught fragments. "They say it's worth $33 million. Wonder who gets it all." No one mentioned my name. To them, I was the poor younger brother, the quiet land surveyor who never left his drafting table. By the time we reached Crane and Doyle Law Office in Sedona, the place was packed. Distant relatives, a few business partners, and plenty of curious locals filled the room. The air was heavy. You could feel the tension hum. I found a seat in the back, leaning on my cane. Brandon, on the other hand, strode right up front, dropping into a chair beside attorney Melissa Crane's desk like he already owned the place. Emily sat next to him, her eyes lowered. Melissa adjusted her glasses, shuffled her papers, and began reading in a measured voice that carried across the room. She listed everything: the Sedona Hilltop Estate, the parcels along Route 89, the vintage truck collection, the investment accounts, the trust funds. Every single item, every dollar of that $33 million estate went to my daughter and her husband. There were gasps, murmurs, even applause. Brandon grinned, squeezing Emily's hand, the look of a man claiming victory. I sat still, my heart heavy. I wasn't surprised Richard trusted his niece, but bitterness still rose when I saw Brandon smirking like he'd won some grand bet. Then Melissa paused, took up a smaller sheet, and said with a faint smile, "And finally, to his younger brother, Mr. Walter Hanlon, Richard leaves an old wooden transit case." The room fell silent. Then came the laughter. Brandon threw his head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "The old man's worthless. All he gets is a pile of junk." A few relatives chuckled. Others muttered pity under their breath. No one spoke for me. I took a deep breath, walked up to the desk, and signed the acknowledgement sheet. I could feel the eyes burning into my back, each one a needle. As Melissa gathered her papers, Brandon leaned close and whispered, "Don't even think about asking for more. It's all ours now. You're nothing." I didn't reply. I just reached for the case. It was heavier than I expected, oak worn smooth, brass hinges rusted red. I lifted it without asking for help and stepped out into the blinding Arizona noon. The heat hit me like a furnace. Sweat rolled down my temples as a few onlookers pointed and laughed, gossip already spreading down the street. Emily kept her head down, hiding behind Brandon, unable to meet my eyes. That hurt more than the laughter ever could. I walked slowly toward my old pickup truck, the same one I'd patched a dozen times with rivets and duct tape. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the transit case pressed not only on my shoulders, but on whatever pride I had left. The laughter from the law office still echoed in my ears when I opened the door and set the case on the torn back seat. I took a deep breath, pulled my hat low, and reminded myself that even if the world saw a worn-out old surveyor with a useless wooden box, there were still things they couldn't take from me. Dignity was one of them. I tied the case down with an old rope, its fibers frayed from years of use, and tightened each knot the way I used to secure my tripods on windy field days. The Arizona sun beat hard on my neck. Sweat pooled under my collar as I cinched the rope. The oak box felt heavier than steel, not just wood and brass, but shame and memory. The truck coughed twice before starting, like it too was questioning whether this drive home was worth it. I had barely rolled a few yards when a black Cadillac Escalade roared past, horn blaring. Brandon leaned out the window, sunglasses flashing. "Careful with your treasure, old man. Don't lose it." His laughter mixed with the growl of the engine, leaving me in a cloud of dust. I gripped the steering wheel but said nothing. At my age, I'd learned that answering insults only feeds the man throwing them. Still, the silence burned. When I turned down Main Street, a few young men outside the coffee shop looked up. Everyone in town knew the story by now. They saw me, the broke brother with the junk box tied to the back of his truck, and burst out laughing. "Look at Walt Hanlon," one shouted, "the proud owner of an empty coffin." "Bet there's nothing inside but rust and sawdust," another added. Their laughter followed me until the sound of it thinned with distance. I pretended not to hear, but each chuckle felt like a drill into my chest. At the farmer's market near the square, vendors turned to watch as I passed. One woman whispered, "Poor old man. Must be humiliating to walk away with just a box while the others got millions." I couldn't tell if she pitied me or enjoyed the gossip. Either way, it stung. By the time I reached my dirt road, the rumor had beaten me home. In towns like Flagstaff, news travels faster than freight trains. Mrs. Carmen, the woman who swept her porch every morning, called out, "What did they give you, Mr. Hanlon? Is that really all?" I nodded and kept walking. At my gate, Lily came running out, pigtails crooked, clutching her rag doll. She wrapped her arms around my leg. "Grandpa, is that the treasure?" I crouched down, my knees popping like gravel under weight, and managed a tired smile. "Maybe it is, sweetheart. Maybe it is." Inside, the floorboards creaked as I dragged the case across them. From the porch, my neighbor Mr. Reeves called out, rocking slowly in his chair under the shade. The old railroad engineer always had a cigar between his fingers. "Don't underestimate small things, Walt. They often hide bigger truths." I looked up at him but couldn't tell whether it was comfort or just habit. I nodded once. The house smelled faintly of beans simmering and hot oil. Emily was in the kitchen, pretending not to see me. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Silence said it all. Brandon, of course, was gone, probably celebrating his victory over tequila and loud music somewhere downtown. I dropped into the wooden chair I'd built years ago in my workshop and stared at the case. The oak had faded to gray, the brass hinges dull and pitted. I ran my fingers over the cracks, wondering what Richard had meant by leaving me this. A joke? A message? Lily sat cross-legged on the floor in front of it, tapped the lid with her knuckles and giggled. "It sounds empty, Grandpa." Her laughter, pure, unguarded, cut through me like sunlight through dust. I didn't want her to see the sadness in my eyes, so I looked away. I pulled the case to the corner of the room, found the brass alignment key that came with it, and turned the lock until it clicked. Then I slipped the key beneath my pillow, guarding it as if it truly were a treasure. The afternoon dragged on, each minute stretching like the long desert horizon outside. Through the thin walls of my cabin, I could hear the neighborhood kids kicking a ball against the fence, each thud followed by a burst of laughter. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by Lily humming a tune she'd learned at school. By nightfall, the wind picked up. It slipped through the gaps in the old window frames, making the curtains sway like pale ghosts. I lay on my back but couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brandon's grin, that smirk of victory when he called me useless in front of everyone. Around midnight, the dog next door barked sharply. I got up and peered through the blinds. A dark pickup was creeping down the gravel road, its tires crunching slow over stone. The headlights swept across my porch for a moment, then vanished into the dark. I didn't recognize the truck, but unease settled in my gut like sand. I returned to bed. Lily was fast asleep beside me. Emily had let her stay over that night. She clutched her rag doll, cheeks flushed, breathing steady under the blanket. Watching her, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. I turned off the lamp, shut my eyes, and asked myself the same question I'd asked all day. Was this transit case just dead weight, or did it hold something I hadn't yet seen? When the first light of dawn leaked through the slats, I was already awake. The neighbor's rooster had crowed twice. My back ached as I sat up and looked toward the corner where I'd left the case. In the dim gray light, the oak box almost seemed to be watching me, waiting. I dragged it into the middle of the room. The sound of it scraping across the tile woke Lily. She appeared at the doorway, hair tangled, doll in her arms. "Morning, Grandpa. What are you doing?" "Just cleaning it off, sweetheart. It's covered in dust," I said, reaching for an old rag. I wiped the lid, sending up little clouds of dust that caught the sunlight and made me cough. The wood groaned under pressure, and a faint, musty smell filled the room, the scent of old depots and forgotten workshops. Lily giggled, tapping her palms along the side like a drum. "Listen, it's hollow." I smiled so she wouldn't worry, but her words struck me. I leaned closer, tapped with my knuckles, and noticed something. One corner sounded deeper, duller. My pulse quickened. I fetched a small utility knife from the kitchen and knelt beside the case. I traced the seams. At one edge, the blade slipped in. I twisted gently. Crack. A slat of wood popped loose. Inside lay a dusty velvet pouch. I opened it. No gold, no cash, just an old Motorola flip phone from the early 2000s and a 12-volt car charger adapter. "A phone?" Lily asked, confused. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Dead as a stone. Of course, it had been sitting there for years. "Is it broken, Grandpa?" "Just sleeping, sweetheart," I said. My heart was racing, though. Why would Richard hide this? I ran a long extension cord out to the driveway and plugged the adapter into the cigarette lighter of my old truck. I sat there in the cab, sweating in the midday heat, staring at the black screen. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then a flicker. The battery icon flashed red. Suddenly, the phone vibrated in my hand, startling me. A text message popped up. No number, just a set of coordinates, 35 DG11 42.0 and 111 DG39 15.0 W. Look for the iron sight, 0800 hours. I knew those numbers. I didn't need Google Maps, I needed my tools. I rushed back inside and dug out my old topographic maps of Coconino County. I spread them on the kitchen table, smoothing the creases. Using my brass protractor and scale ruler, I plotted the point. It wasn't a warehouse. It was the middle of the desert, near the old abandoned railway bridge, a spot known as Devil's Drop. Why there? My heart pounded. Then, it vibrated. The ringtone shattered the silence loud enough to make Lily scream and drop her doll. I nearly dropped the phone myself. On the screen, unknown caller. I hesitated, breath shallow, then pressed it to my ear. A deep, gravelly voice came through, faint but deliberate. "If you're hearing this, it means Mr. Richard Hanlon trusted you. The real inheritance begins here." My blood ran cold. The air thickened around me. "Who is this? What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Silence stretched, long enough to make the seconds feel eternal. Then the voice returned. "The case is only the beginning. Be ready. Instructions will follow." The line went dead. The phone screen dimmed, leaving only the long, flat tone of disconnection. Lily tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide. "Grandpa? Was that Uncle Richard's voice?" I held her close, whispering softly, "No, sweetheart, but someone speaking for him." And for a long time, I just sat there, the phone heavy in my palm, as if it carried the weight of something far greater than I could yet understand. That evening, I sat on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar to calm my nerves. The smell of cigar smoke drifted over the fence. "Going on a trip, Walt?" It was Mr. Reeves. He was leaning on the fence, his face hidden in shadow. "Maybe," I said cautiously. Reeves took a long drag of his cigar. "Saw that son-in-law of yours creeping around your truck while you were inside with the little one. Stuck something under the rear bumper." My grip tightened on the knife. "What?" "Black plastic box, magnetized. Looks like a GPS tracker. High-end stuff." Reeves flicked ash onto the grass. "Richard told me you might need eyes in the back of your head. Consider me those eyes." I stared at him. "You knew?" "I was the engineer on the rail line Richard built in '85. We go way back. He knew Brandon would come for you. He knew the boy is greedy, but lazy. He trusts technology more than instinct." I stood up, my blood boiling. Brandon wasn't just watching, he was hunting me like an animal. I walked to the back of my truck and felt under the bumper. Cold plastic. I pulled it loose, a blinking tracker. I started to smash it, but Reeves spoke up softly. "Don't destroy it, Walt. Use it. If he wants to follow you, it would take him for a ride." A plan formed in my mind. A cold, hard plan. "Thanks, Arthur," I said, using his first name for the first time in years. He nodded. "Mrs. Reeves sent over some pie. It's on the counter. You'll need the energy." The house was silent, except for the faint noise of traffic drifting up from the highway. Outside, dogs began barking somewhere down the street. I rose, went to the window, and parted the curtain just enough to see. At the far corner, under the streetlight, sat a dark sedan idling in shadow. I could swear it was Brandon's. It lingered for several seconds, headlights off, before rolling away into the dark. A chill ran down my spine. I shut the curtain and held Lily close, pretending calm. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted. That the case everyone mocked might hold a secret heavier than any inheritance measured in dollars or deeds. I couldn't sleep that night. The phone lay on the nightstand like an animal I didn't trust, its black screen reflecting the lamp's glow. At any moment, I half expected it to light up again. Barely half an hour passed before it did. The vibration cut through the stillness, harsh and steady. My heart pounded. I picked it up with trembling hands. "Who is this?" I whispered. The same gravelly voice answered. No greeting, no explanation. "Tomorrow, the old warehouse by the tracks on the edge of town. Bring the key from the case. Tell no one." "Wait, why me? What's there?" I asked, but the line went dead. Only the dull beep, beep, beep of disconnection filled my ear. I slid the phone under my pillow. Sleep never came. The voice echoed through my head. Was it someone who had worked with Richard? An accomplice? An enemy? I didn't know. When morning broke, I felt more exhausted than when I'd lain down. I put on my heavy canvas work shirt, the kind I'd worn surveying ridgelines in winter, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, yet my nerves buzzed like live wire. I checked my truck, tires, oil, rope. I knew the day ahead would be long. The phone went into my jacket's inside pocket. I reached for the key. Lily ran from the kitchen, hair newly braided, holding her rag doll. "Where are you going, Grandpa? Can I come?" I pulled her close, those clear eyes always undoing me. "Not this time, sweetheart. Stay with your mom. I'll be home soon." She followed me to the gate, pleading, until she realized I wouldn't bend. She stood there watching as I hoisted the transit case onto the truck bed. Just as I tightened the ropes, a familiar voice came from behind. "Still dragging that useless box around?" Brandon. He wore a pale suit, shoes polished like mirrors, an envelope stamped with a notary seal in hand. The deed to the parcels he'd just inherited. He held it up as if to show it off. "You'd be better off burning that crate in your fireplace, old man." I didn't answer. I climbed into the truck, turned the key, and pulled away without looking back. In the rearview mirror, he stood with arms crossed, suspicion narrowing his eyes, as if he already sensed something slipping from his control. The road to the outskirts was busier than usual. I passed the Wednesday farmers market. Vendors shouted over one another. Tamales, baskets of fruit, fresh cheese. A woman waved a sweet roll at me, but I kept driving. I had no appetite. At the town square, a group of kids played marbles. They burst out laughing and pointed toward the avenue, where Brandon's gleaming SUV had just passed. "Look, the town's new rich guy." They cheered like he was some kind of hero. I clenched my jaw. No one cheers for an old man in a rusted truck with a mysterious box tied down in back. The farther I drove, the sparser the houses became. Dusty roads, tall weeds, the faint metallic tang of old rails in the air. Finally, I reached the abandoned warehouse by the tracks. The walls were cracked and layered with graffiti. Rust bled from the seams. A corroded iron door stood before me, the number 27 barely visible in faded white paint. I stepped out, pulled the brass key from my pocket, and forced it into the stiff lock. Metal ground against metal, screaming as it turned. The door opened with a slow, heavy moan. Inside, darkness. The air smelled of old iron and rancid oil. I took my flashlight from my jacket and flicked it on. The beam landed on the floor, and I froze. 3 large metal chests sat in the center of the room, dust thick around them. Each one was engraved with a single raised letter, R, the first letter of my brother's name, Richard. I stepped closer, my boots stirring clouds of dust. On a cobwebbed table nearby lay a yellowed envelope. My name was written across it, in Richard's unmistakable handwriting. To Walt. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a short letter, scrawled in haste. "Brother, the real inheritance isn't what Brandon took. It's here, and only you have the courage to protect it." I read those words again and again. My chest tightened. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt him close, like he was standing right there beside me. Then came a sound. Footsteps on gravel, slow, deliberate, the crunch of boots against stone. I shut off my flashlight and pressed my back against the wall. Through the narrow crack of the half-open door, I saw the glow of headlights sweeping across the warehouse floor. My pulse hammered. I recognized that silhouette instantly. Brandon. He climbed out of the black car, pacing with restless confidence. His shadow stretched long across the dirt, each step echoing like a warning. I didn't move. Not a breath. Outside, my son-in-law lingered, snapping his lighter open, the flare briefly carving his face out of the dark before the smoke swallowed him again. I stayed frozen. If he suspected anything, he'd come inside, and everything would unravel. When the engine roared to life again, I exhaled slowly. The car idled, then revved hard and faded down the road, leaving only the smell of burned fuel in the still night air. I sat on a rotted bench, sweat soaking my palms. My flashlight beam shook as I opened the drawer where Richard's envelope had been. Inside was a tiny copper-wired key, no bigger than my thumb. I held it under the dim light. The message beside it was short, almost cryptic. "This isn't all, brother. Keep searching." My fingers tightened around the key. Exhaustion warred with curiosity, but the thought burned clear. I hadn't finished uncovering the case. Outside, the night was eerily quiet. I stepped out, scanning the lot before heading to my truck. The old transit case sat in the bed, rope still knotted tight. Under the pale yellow street lamp, the wood seams looked slightly raised. A hunch took over. I drew my bone-handled knife, the same one I'd carried in the field, and eased the blade between 2 panels. The scrape of metal against wood made my nerves stretch thin, as if Brandon might reappear at any moment. Then, a dry click. The bottom board shifted, a false layer. I pressed gently and it lifted free. Beneath it, a second compartment, smaller, deeper, perfectly concealed. Inside, wrapped in waxed canvas and tied with hemp cord, was a rectangular bundle. Its weight surprised me. I opened it carefully. First, a sealed brown envelope stamped with red wax. Beneath it, a heavier iron key, old, cold, deliberate, and a folded slip of paper. I unfolded it. 6 blue ink digits glared back, still clear despite age. I memorized them instantly, sensing their importance. The envelope contained just a few lines in Richard's hand. "The first door you already know. The second opens to the truth. Trust, but do not speak. Let no one see you." My breath caught. Everything before this, the rusty nails, the broken watch, even the phone, had been a test, a prelude, but this felt different. This key carried weight, like a verdict. I tucked the items into my jacket's inside pocket, buttoned it tight, and replaced the empty wrapping under the false panel, wiping away any sign of tampering. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo. Crickets filled the silence, and somewhere nearby, an owl called. I felt a chill climb my spine. Brandon could still be watching. I climbed into the truck and started the engine. The tires crunched over the gravel, steady but tense. The road home felt endless. Streetlights flickered, the hum of tires on grit drumming a rhythm in my chest. When I turned onto my block, my stomach tightened. Parked just a few yards from my house was a familiar black car, its lights off. I didn't slow down. Pretending not to see it, I drove past, turned at the next corner, and cut through an old service lane only the retirees used anymore. I came around the back of my property, killed the engine, and stepped out. The night air was cold and still. I dragged the transit case from the truck bed and hauled it toward the rear door, quietly, carefully, determined not to make a single sound. When I opened the door, Lily ran toward me with a notebook clutched to her chest. "Grandpa, I learned a new song at school today. Do you want to hear it?" Her bright, innocent voice filled the room, and for a moment, it washed away the dread inside me. I knelt down, pulled her close, and kissed her forehead. "Sing, sweetheart. Go ahead." As she hummed those simple, lilting notes, a car rolled past outside. Headlights flared across the curtains for a second, and reality snapped back. Through that thin fabric, I saw Brandon leaning against his black car, cigarette glowing between his lips, eyes locked on my house. The ember flickered like a watchful eye. I closed the curtain, slid the bolt, and stood still, listening to his footsteps scrape along the sidewalk. I lit the oil lamp and brushed Lily's hair, forcing a calm smile so she wouldn't see the storm behind my ribs. But deep down, I knew. What I had found wasn't just a key. It was the start of something far greater. And Brandon had sensed it. I promised myself one thing: he would never get it. I woke before dawn, when the air still clung with cold and the light outside was a pale shade of steel. Quietly I dressed, careful not to wake Emily or Lily. The house slept, but my mind was sharp, alert. Today would decide everything. I took the heavy iron key and the folded note with the 6 blue digits, slipping them into the lining beneath my boot sole. That was the only place that felt safe. Brandon wouldn't think to look there. In the hallway, I found Emily at the stove, pouring coffee. "You're up early, Dad," she said softly. "Where are you headed?" "To the cemetery," I lied. "It's been too long since I visited your Uncle Richard." Her eyes softened, but she didn't pry. She knew my quiet ways, but not the lie behind them. Outside, the old truck coughed twice before starting. I drove toward the edge of town, following the road that led to the hills, though not to any cemetery. A few miles out, I turned onto a dusty service path that cut toward an abandoned freight yard. The place looked forgotten by time. Rusted rail cars lined up like tombs, graffiti fading under the morning sun. The air smelled of iron and dry grass. According to Richard's envelope, this was the next step. I just had to find the right door. I walked through the tangle of twisted steel until I spotted it, a corroded metal hatch with faint numbers barely visible under silver paint, the same digits I'd seen in the note. I knelt, pulled out the iron key, and slid it into the lock. Metal groaned, echoing through the empty yard. I turned it twice, and the bolt released with a sharp clank. The door was heavy, reluctant. I pushed slowly, and a cloud of dust rose, making me cough. My flashlight cut through the darkness. The room inside was vast, far larger than the warehouse before. The beam caught 3 large metal chests arranged in perfect alignment at the center. Each one bore a raised letter R, carved clean and deliberate. The silence was thick enough to hear my heartbeat. I approached the first chest. It was sealed with oil paper and a red wax stamp. My hands shook as I tore it open and lifted the lid. Light burst against my eyes, bars of gold stacked neatly, gleaming beneath the beam. I reached out and touched one. It was cold, solid, impossibly heavy. I closed it carefully and moved to the second. The scent of new paper struck me before I even looked. Bundles of crisp dollar bills filled it edge to edge, still bound with rubber bands. I slid a bill between my fingers. It made that dry, distinct whisper only fresh currency makes. The third chest held documents, land titles, contracts, survey maps marked with red ink, and ledgers. Letters in Richard's handwriting ran across several pages. It was like hearing his voice from beyond the grave. On a table beside the chests, covered in dust and cobwebs, lay a leather-bound notebook. The cover read, in steady, familiar script, "To Walt, from your brother, Richard." I sat down and opened it. The first pages traced his life's work, the alliances, the risks, the betrayals, detailed reports, names of partners, and warnings about those who had deceived him. But on one page, written darker, firmer, more deliberate than the rest, I found the words that stopped my breath. "Walt, you are the keeper of this family's fire. Brandon only knows how to destroy. This wealth was never meant for him. Use it wisely. Don't let fear or pride guide you. The fate of our name rests in your hands." I read those lines over and over until the letters blurred. Something swelled in my chest, part grief, part awe, part an iron resolve. For the first time, I understood that Richard had seen beyond the surface, that the sting of being left with nothing in the public will had been a setup, a trap for Brandon, and a test for me. I sat motionless, staring at the bars of gold, the neat stacks of bills, the deeds laid out like maps of a life rebuilt from dust. The afternoon light streamed through the cracks in the steel walls, painting streaks of gold across the room. For a brief moment, it all felt unreal. Too bright, too silent, too heavy to be true. Then came the sound. The low growl of an engine I knew too well, first faint, then nearer, until it filled the yard like thunder. My spine stiffened. I shut off the flashlight and closed each chest in haste. The notebook went back on the table. I sealed the lids and left the door just slightly ajar. Gravel crunched outside. A car door slammed. The deep purr of Brandon's black Cadillac rolled through the still air. I hid behind a steel column and held my breath. Through the slit in the door, I saw his silhouette, his pale jacket catching the light, his stride quick and restless. He looked around like a hound that had caught a scent. My pulse pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. I shut my eyes for a moment and prayed for steadiness. This confrontation had been inevitable. He had followed me here, and now he stood one step away from discovering what Richard had meant to keep out of his reach. I lowered myself onto the old workbench, hands trembling as I turned the pages of the leather notebook again. On the first page, written in firm, confident strokes, was a line that froze me. To my brother, Walt. The ink was steady, timeless. I traced the letters with my fingertips as if I could touch my brother's voice. It was the first time since his death that I truly felt him near. I read slowly, the words landing heavy and deliberate. Walt, I've seen greed hollow out good men. Wealth is a magnet for the worst hearts. Brandon is one of them. That's why I left him the visible fortune, the bait he would never resist. But you, brother, you are the keeper of what's real. You earned with your own hands what others tried to buy. That is why I trusted you. My throat tightened. I had spent years believing Richard had forgotten me, that his fortune had swallowed him whole. Now I realized it had all been deliberate, an act of faith disguised as rejection. I turned the page. There were ledgers, coordinates, maps marked with red ink, survey data, mining parcels, mineral rights hidden under false company names, every line written with the precision of a man who expected his brother to finish the work. Near the third chest, on a rusted shelf, I noticed a small velvet box. Inside was a silver pen engraved RH. The metal was cold, but holding it felt warm, like he'd just set it down. I pulled a blank page from the ledger and signed my name with that pen. The ink flowed smooth, unbroken, as though Richard himself had filled it yesterday. Then, footsteps. A faint crunch on gravel, the metallic creak of a shoe pivoting on stone. My blood froze. I snapped off the flashlight and crouched near the door. Through the narrow gap, headlights flashed once, cutting across the entrance. The engine idled, then stopped. The door opened. I saw him, Brandon, stepping out, lighting a cigarette, the orange flare revealing his face for an instant. He looked around, scanning the yard like a predator searching for movement. Each footstep grew louder, closer. I was cornered. If he came inside, everything Richard had hidden would be exposed. A cold bead of sweat ran down my spine. Then I remembered something. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the second envelope I'd found inside the transit case. I tore it open. Inside, in Richard's small, tight handwriting, were 6 words. If he follows, Lead him to number 15. Even in death, my brother had anticipated this moment. A contingency, written for the inevitable. I folded the note, slipped it into my pocket, and took a deep breath. The game had changed, and now the next move was mine. A contingency, even for that. My brother had foreseen that Brandon wouldn't take long to follow me. I had to move fast. I closed the leather notebook carefully and slid it beneath the lid of the second chest. Everything had to look untouched. I took one last glance at the rows of gold bars, the stacks of cash, the deeds, the weight of responsibility pressing on my shoulders like a mountain, and then eased the heavy door shut. The key turned with a slow metallic groan. I slipped out through the rear exit of the warehouse, a narrow, rust-eaten corridor between two concrete walls. My breath fogged in the cold air as I made my way to the back of the complex. Warehouse number 15 stood where the shadows were deepest, its roof half collapsed, paint blistered and flaking off the tin walls. The rusted door was covered in graffiti. Richard had left a false lock there, along with a key cut to fit perfectly. I set it into the latch and left it dangling, just visible under the flickering light of a single street lamp. Everything was ready for the trap. The low growl of Brandon's Cadillac echoed from the far side of the yard. I ducked behind a crumbling wall, heart pounding. He reached the real warehouse first. The lock held. He kicked the frame and cursed under his breath. Then, turning toward the narrow lane, his eyes caught the glint of metal, the key at door number 15. Like a starving predator, he went straight for it. The lock clicked open. He smiled. I watched from the dark as he pushed the door wide and vanished inside the hollow shell. Dust and rust fell from the hinges with a shriek. Inside, the sound of his boots thudded and scraped. He was tearing through the debris, convinced the treasure was his. I slipped back, step by step, keeping to the sand and cinders so not a pebble would shift underfoot. His ragged breathing carried through the still air. The man who had mocked me at my own table was now clawing through junk like a desperate scavenger. From my cover, I saw his flashlight sweep the ruins, over rusted sewing machines, warped drawers, empty crates. He muttered curses through clenched teeth. "Damn it! The old man's been playing me!" The words bounced off the hollow metal walls. In a burst of fury, he shoved a rusted lathe aside. It toppled with a thunderous crash that sent rats skittering across the floor. One brushed his leg and he yelled, jerking backward, kicking at the air. I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from laughing. The arrogant man, terrified of a few rats, that alone was worth the risk. He spotted a trunk in the corner and lunged for it. The lid came up with a violent creak, releasing a cloud of dust. Inside, only mildewed papers and rags. "Nothing! Nothing!" he roared, slamming the lid so hard it split a board. Sweat ran down his temple, his face flushed red with rage. Then, a sudden gust swept through the corridor. The half-broken door slammed shut with a hollow bang that echoed through the yard. Brandon flinched, stumbling backward, cursing again. I crouched lower behind the wall as he stormed out, gasping, humiliated, brushing dirt from his sleeves. His jaw clenched. "That old man won't get away with this," he growled to the night, cigarette trembling between his fingers. He looked around, scanning the shadows for me. But by then, I was already gone, folding into the darkness of the rail yard, one careful step at a time. At last, he climbed into the car and started the engine with a harsh roar. Gravel and dust scattered behind the spinning tires as the Cadillac tore down the lane. The sound faded into the night until all that was left was silence. I waited a few minutes just to be certain he wouldn't circle back. Then I returned to the real warehouse, double-checked the locks, ran my hand along the edges of the door to make sure everything was sealed, and slipped the key back into its hiding place. A short-lived calm settled over me. I knew Brandon would start questioning things soon enough, that he'd come after me again, hungrier and more dangerous than before. But tonight, time was mine. Driving home, I took the dirt road slow. The headlights barely reached 10 yards ahead. Weariness pulled at my eyelids, but the thought of Lily kept me awake. When I reached Flagstaff, the town was quiet. The streets were mostly empty except for a few drunks arguing outside the tavern on Aspen Avenue. I stopped at Mrs. Reeves's bakery. She always left the light on late. The bell chimed as I entered. "Mr. Hanlon," she exclaimed, "haven't seen you out this late in years." "Just grabbing something sweet for my granddaughter," I said, forcing a tired smile. She handed me a small paper bag of fresh-baked rolls. The warm, buttery smell gave me a fleeting sense of peace. "I'm glad to see you looking better," she said gently. "You've seemed worried lately." I paid and stepped back into the night, clutching the bag to my chest like a charm. When I finally reached home, Lily was waiting in her pajamas, sitting cross-legged on the couch. She ran to me the moment I opened the door. "Grandpa, did you bring something?" she asked, eyes wide. I handed her the bag and her face lit up. She sat at the table, giggling as she bit into a roll. I watched her quietly, realizing how close I'd come to losing everything that truly mattered. That night, I stayed up late, checked the locks twice, looked out the window more than once to make sure no car lights appeared down the street. Deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. Brandon wasn't the kind to let humiliation rest. The next time, he'd come angrier and far more reckless. I lay down finally, listening to the soft rhythm of Lily's breathing from the next room. I closed my eyes with a cold certainty. I had survived the first test, but the real battle hadn't begun. Days passed since the decoy warehouse incident. I tried to live normally, watering the small patch of garden out back, fixing the old gate hinge, taking Lily to the market whenever Emily worked late. But peace felt like thin glass, ready to shatter. Brandon hadn't shown up, and that silence was worse than his presence. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and the day's heat clung to the walls, someone pounded on my door. Not a polite knock, hard, angry blows, the kind that demanded entry. I opened it carefully. Brandon stood there. His jaw was locked tight, eyes burning with something raw and dangerous. In his hand was a bottle of whiskey, still sealed. He raised it like a flag of false goodwill. "Father-in-law," he said, forcing a crooked grin, "came to drink to family." He didn't wait for permission, just walked straight in, set the bottle down with a heavy thud, and rummaged through the kitchen cabinets until he found 2 glasses, as if he owned the place. I said nothing. He twisted the cap off. The sharp scent of whiskey filled the room. He poured 2 full glasses, handed me one, and lifted his own. "To Richard," he said flatly, and drained it in one swallow. I only took a sip. His hand trembled as he refilled. His eyes roamed the room, pausing on the old trunk in the corner, the curtains, my hands. Without warning, he slammed the glass down. The crash made me flinch. Whiskey splashed across the table. "What are you hiding, old man?" he growled, leaning closer. "That chest, what's really inside?" I looked him in the eye. "I'm hiding nothing, Brandon. I'm living my life. Something you should try doing instead of chasing ghosts." "Don't lecture me!" He slammed his fist on the table. "You think you won? Richard left me millions. The land alone is worth 30. "Is it?" I asked quietly. He paused, blinking. "What do you mean?" "Richard and I surveyed those parcels in the 80s, I said, my voice steady. "Did you check the soil reports before you leveraged them for loans? That land was a dumping ground for the old copper smelter. It's condemned, Brandon. The EPA won't let you build a doghouse on it, let alone a resort." His face went pale. "You're lying." "Am I? Why do you think Richard never developed it? He held onto it as a buffer zone. It's worthless, son. Actually, it's worse than worthless. It's a liability. The cleanup costs alone will bankrupt you." The realization hit him like a physical blow. I could see the gears turning. The loans he'd taken out against the land value, the investors he'd promised huge returns to. He wasn't just broke, he was underwater. That was Richard's real trap. He gave Brandon the rope, knowing exactly how he would hang himself. Brandon staggered back, knocking over his chair. No, I have the mining rights, the silver." "There is no silver," I said softly. "We mined it all out in 92. That was the moment he broke. Not when the police came, but right there in my kitchen. The arrogance evaporated, leaving only a scared, foolish boy who had gambled everything on a lie. The air thickened with tension. I stood, walked slowly to the window, and opened it. Cool air drifted in, stirring the curtains but not the dread between us. I looked outside for a moment, then turned back to face him. Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her apron still on, hands wet from the sink. "Brandon, stop," she pleaded. "Don't do this to my father." He swung toward her, his voice sharp. "Stay out of it, Emily. This is between me and him." She stepped back, eyes brimming with tears. His jaw clenched until it trembled, his face twisting into something unrecognizable. "You stubborn old man! You'll pay for this!" He slammed the door on his way out so hard the whole house shook. The roar of his engine followed, the tires shrieking against gravel, the sound fading into the distance until silence itself felt heavy. Emily sank into a chair, covering her face. The sound of her sobs filled the kitchen. Shame, fear, exhaustion, all tangled together. I stood there, helpless. She was torn between blind love for her husband and the blood bond to her father. Lily ran in from the porch, trembling, eyes wide. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I'm scared." I picked her up, pressed her close to my chest and stroked her hair. "You're safe, sweetheart. Nothing's gonna hurt you here." But I knew that wasn't true. Brandon had crossed a line. This wasn't just greed anymore. It was hatred, personal and burning. That night, after putting Lily to bed and locking every window, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The whiskey bottle was still there, half empty. His fingerprints smudged the rim of the glass. In the dim light, the old trunk in the corner seemed to breathe with me. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was the source of everything. My brother's trust, Brandon's obsession, and my daughter's pain. I thought of Richard's warnings, of how ambition had consumed Brandon until he became a shadow of the man Emily once loved. I took a long breath. Whatever came next would be final. Brandon wouldn't stop. And I, old or not, had to be ready for the last confrontation. News in a small town travels faster than wind. Soon, whispers about Brandon reached me. People said he'd started selling off parcels of land Richard had left behind, bragging that a new silver mining venture would make him a millionaire in weeks. Every time I went to the market, I heard the same tune. "That Brandon Cross is about to outdo even Richard Hanlon," people murmured with envy. I kept quiet. I knew better. His ambition was a magnet for ruin. In the taverns, the talk grew louder, men slapping tables, claiming Brandon had insider deals that his family's fortune was about to double. And there he was, strutting around town like a king, promising investors the world, buying rounds of whiskey like he was already rich. Reality, though, hit harder than any hangover. Weeks later, word spread like wildfire. His backer had disappeared overnight, taking every cent of the investment fund with him. Brandon was left hanging, buried in debt and worthless contracts. I was standing in the town square when someone read a new notice pinned to the courthouse door. The bank was foreclosing on multiple properties. Brandon's name was right there, along with the address of the mansion he once boasted about. That afternoon, I walked to the gate of that estate. On the iron fence fluttered a white paper stamped in red, "Foreclosed." It was the perfect symbol of a downfall. Brandon sat in the courtyard, shirt half open, a nearly empty bottle beside him. His face was flushed, eyes sunken. He cursed everyone, the bank, the investors, fate itself. Even Richard, even me. He smashed the bottle, shards scattering across the tiles like pieces of his own arrogance. Neighbors watched from behind the fence, whispering, "From heaven to dirt. That's what happens when you mock your own family." I said nothing. I just stood there for a while, watching the man who once thought he owned the world now screaming into the void. When night fell, Emily appeared at my door, eyes swollen, suitcase in hand. Lily followed, clutching her rag doll. "Dad," she said, voice breaking, "I can't do this anymore. I won't let Lily grow up with shouting and debts." I didn't hesitate. I opened the door wide, took their bags, and led them to the small room near the kitchen. Lily ran into my arms and buried her face against my chest. I knew I'd made the right choice. This house, humble as it was, would be their shelter. As Emily unpacked, Brandon's angry shouts still echoed faintly across town, the cries of a wounded animal no one cared to help. None of his so-called friends came, not the drinking buddies, not the investors. They'd all vanished. That night, I lit the oil lamp. The three of us sat around the old wooden table. I broke a piece of sweet bread from Mrs. Reeves's bakery and poured mugs of hot cocoa. The warm smell filled the air. Lily giggled, chocolate foam on her lip. It was the first true laughter I'd heard in days. Watching her, I felt the weight of the past months begin to lift. Maybe all this pain had a purpose, to bring us to this moment, a family reunited, finally beyond the shadow of Brandon Cross. But peace, I knew, would not last long. By morning, the police had arrived in town. Word of the silver mine scam had reached the state authorities. Brandon wasn't just bankrupt anymore. He was under investigation for fraud, money laundering, and a string of dirty deals. From my window, I watched the patrol cars stop in front of what was once his pride, the big house now stripped of its glory. He stumbled out, shouting, pushing back as the officers tried to cuff him. His voice cracked, full of fury and desperation. He called my name. He cursed everyone. He begged Emily to speak for him. No one did. When they finally led him away, his wrists bound and his face pale, the crowd on the sidewalk stayed silent. Some faces showed relief, others contempt. But not pity. There was a message written in every stare. You reap what you sow. By afternoon, the town had gone quiet again. The patrol cars were gone. The echoes of the morning faded into the sound of wind moving through the cottonwoods. That night, there was a knock at the door. I tensed, but it was soft, rhythmic. I opened it to find Mr. and Mrs. Reeves standing there. Mrs. Reeves held a fresh basket of cinnamon rolls, and Arthur held a bottle of vintage wine. Heard the pest control finally cleared out the rats, Arthur Reeves said with a wink, gesturing toward the empty mansion down the street. Come in, I said, stepping aside. We sat around the table, my family and the friends who had watched over us. The house smelled of warm cinnamon and old wine, a scent far richer than the metallic tang of gold. Richard would be proud, Mr. Reeves said, raising his glass. He always said the transit case was for the man who knew how to find his way when the path was hidden. Lily looked up, mouth full of cinnamon roll. Grandpa found the way. I looked at the faces around me. The gold bars and cash were locked away safe in a trust for Lily's education and Emily's future. But looking at my daughter's relieved smile and my neighbor's warm handshake, I knew the truth. Richard hadn't just left me money. He had given me the chance to prove to Brandon, to the town, and to myself that I wasn't just a useless old man. I was Walter Hanlon, brother, father, grandfather. And I was still standing. From that day on, we began again, building a quiet life on the only wealth that can't be seized, love, trust, and honor. Thank you for watching this story here on Sweet Grandpa Stories. If this tale moved you, please remember to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. May your home always be rich in what truly lasts. Trust, love, and peace. See you in the next story.